All right, picture this. You are at the airport or strolling through the grocery store, and suddenly there they are, someone who seems tailor-made for you. You know that feeling, right? The instant connection you can't ignore. But then they leave. Another mixed connection? Not with Never Missed, a new dating app that turns those chance encounters into unforgettable beginnings. It's simple. Download the Never Missed app for free right now on the App Store or Google Play. In just moments, you will be ready to transform fleeting glances into lasting connections. Download the Never Missed app and make your story of how you met an unforgettable chapter in your journey. Today on CityCast DC, we are talking about a fight at a Wawa, or at least how that fight was covered and what it says about where DC's at right now. I'm here with my CityCast colleagues Priyanka Tilve and Kayla Cote-Stemmerman. Plus, we will chat through the state of statehood and a great big museum reopening. Today is Friday, October 20th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Priyanka.
Hey.
And hey, Kayla.
Good morning.
All right. So, Priyanka, I feel like I'm running like Palookaville CityCast when I say this, but tell us about the fight at the convenience store.
Yeah, I know, right? This story initially blew my mind, and then as it updated, I was further confused. So there was this big fight, apparently, at the Wawa in Tenleytown in Northwest Washington. I just want to read the first line of the Washington Post article that came out right after the fight. It said, a sprawling fight and public disturbance at a Wawa in Northwest Washington prompted police to disperse a crowd of as many as 300 juveniles Friday night. So that was on Friday the 13th, to add some more allure to this story. But when you hear that, you picture something pretty insane, like they didn't say that the fight was 300 people, but a crowd of 300 juveniles like associated with the sprawling fight that creates a picture.
Can I jump in too? Because like that night, it's like my neighborhood, my kid hangs around up there, and we see like on Twitter huge fights, and it was like an independent reporter pushed it out this way before the Post, and like the DC Police Union, which is politically controversial outfit, and also one that has every incentive to play up the notion that DC's in a lawlessness stage.
Right.
So they're pushing this down. We're asking like our kid, like, hey, do your friends know anything about this? What's happening? And they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, and that is the appropriate reaction, because then a few days later, the police revised their report. Instead of 300 juveniles, they say it's been 50 people that they had to disperse. Fewer than 10 were involved in the actual fight. And they said that their initial crowd estimate of 300 was just preliminary. The detectives were investigating, and since then they've discovered it was way smaller after conducting interviews and reviewing surveillance videos. I'm just like, how do you get a fight of 10 confused with a crowd of 300, even a crowd of 50 watching the fight of 10 people? How do you get that confused with a crowd of 300? Those are huge, huge differences.
I'm like so baffled by this. Like 300 people seems like an all out battle. Like 10 people is a scuffle. I'm just confused how somebody can look at that and get confused about that.
This is really where we're at right now. We're in a time when like there is legitimately like a big and scary to a lot of people uptick in crime, in carjacking and assaults. And it coincides with this like sort of collapse of truth and a legit decline in the amount of resources going into like the most like meat and potatoes type of local reporting. And, obviously social media and ways of like putting out stories without vetting and so on. So it makes like a perfect environment for like a story that confirms everybody's preconceived notion about chaos to make its way out there. I'll just point out, like, I live near there. Like, it's right by the entry of the Tenleytown Metro. There's always 300 people nearby, no matter what's going on.
Yeah, actually, the Fox 5 report that I saw did talk about that too. They did a report when the number got brought down to 50. They did it on scene where they were like, as you can see, there are dozens of people around me right now. There are always dozens of people right here. That Wawa is right next to the metro. Like, there's a high school right there. So it's always a busy area. And maybe that played into the police's erroneous reporting. But I feel like, to your point, Mike, in a climate like this where we're all pretty on high alert about crime, they should maybe not give the number out there unless they're sure. Those preliminary numbers maybe shouldn't be reported. But it did also make me feel better because you also mentioned the concerns about trust in the media, trust in the police, and the fact that this kind of embarrassing update had to be made, but they did do it, made me feel a little bit better, at least, that they were upfront about the fact that they were so wrong.
Wait, I don't know if you looked, and I did not. The union, the FOP, which had been one of the social media handles that had alerted us to this 300-person fight, did they correct?
No, Mike, I'm looking at their Twitter right now, and they did not. They had tweeted out the first police report about the 300 juveniles involved in a street brawl, but they have not tweeted out the updated police report that says 50. So, yeah, but I'm not surprised.
Mike, you mentioned, it's kind of in the interest of the police union to make these things seem bigger than they are, right? And to an extent, I think a lot of, reporting and journalism can lean towards the clickbaity side of these things. And it's tempting to report on like massive fights and lots of crime and worst crime in years. And while it is true, like, how much does that add fuel to the fire and make it sort of cyclical in a way?
I don't think that reporting about, if you're saying that just reporting about crime, lead to more crime.
You don't think so? You don't think it like makes it feel like you're in a Wild West and like, what's just another, I don't know.
I mean, like, I tend to think like we've also had like this sort of simultaneously a lot of denial about the uptick in violence from people, from elected officials, from so on. And it's all kind of well motivated in the sense that they've got Congress trying to take away their autonomy. They've got a lot of kind of demagogue stuff going on. But I get a sense that, almost sort of on an emotional level, a lot of the leadership of the city has not really sort of acknowledged the pain a lot of people, a lot of regular citizens are feeling around this. And that too contributes to this like erosion of trust and to an environment where like anyone's going to believe anything. Like rising crime creates like a corrosive thing in a political culture, and the corrosion goes in all kinds of different directions. And that's sort of where we're at.
Yeah, I would agree with that. On a slightly lighter note, one other thing in the article that I thought was interesting was that they called this incident a disorderly affray. So AFFRAY, that's like the word that they use, which is a word I'd never heard. And so it was kind of interesting to learn a new word in the context of this bizarre story.
Wait, I didn't understand. I saw that word too, and I was fascinated with it, but I didn't understand exactly what it meant. So like they define it as like a fight with the consent of more than two people. And does that mean like, hey, Priyanka, like, let's meet tomorrow at 8 at Wawa and fight?
It's a duel.
Or does that just mean like a fight, which is like where like it's not like one person cold cocking another? Do you know? Do they define it?
I would assume the latter.
Okay.
The definition you said is the only definition I've seen. I suppose it could be like old school, like movie type fight where they're like, see you at 8 p.m. at the corner of Wawa and like, we'll settle this there.
I really hope that's what happened.
Bring your friends. A Grease type fight. So I suppose it could mean that, but I imagined more like it's two people both engaged in the actual fight as opposed to, like you said, one person just coming and hitting someone behind the head. But yeah, it's just, the more you know.
All right, so there was a report in Washington City paper from Alex Coma, friend of CityCast, about the recent financial troubles of DC Vote, which is one of the city's big advocacy groups for representation in Congress and, by extension, statehood. And, it's not like either that surprising or that big because this was a a fairly small organization to start with. So it laid off, I think, one of three remaining people. But it is also sort of an indication that this notion that DC might actually attain statehood, which was kind of a loose in the land as the Democrats pondered retaking the whole government in 2020, and which had kind of changed in tone because it was now seen as like a National Democratic Party thing rather than a redressing of like historic racialized injustice thing. But that moment has kind of come and gone, and we're now in a much more complicated moment of statehood.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that they laid off 1 out of 3 full-time employees, which, yeah, so that seems small, like a small organization. But this is kind of the tail end of a decline. Like they had 11 employees at their peak in 2015, and then that started to fall, and now we're down to 3. And so, I don't know, that's in less than a decade. It's fallen from 11 employees to 2. That's pretty
Right.
bad.
And I think this was like an organization that there's a bunch of statehood organizations. This was one which had a lot of business and support, like establishment-y support, or at least within the local context.
As opposed to like the activist vibe that the statehood movement has now.
Yeah. I'm sure there's like, it's all like the narcissism of small differences and stuff. But we've come to a point where like fights about home rule and autonomy are like more complicated. The standard fight of 10 years ago or more was like DC wants to legalize needle exchange or medical marijuana or something, which kind of everybody, had very widespread support. And these like social conservatives on the Hill who are playing to their home districts are trying to get in the way of it. And they seem like bullies and it seems unfair. The more recent congressional meddling has been about things that were actually like very like divisive, even in DC. The criminal code rewrite, things like that, where Bowser had vetoed it, the council had overridden her. For those of us who believe in democracy, like that's how it's supposed to work and it's fine. But it was not like the statehood issue was like grabbing onto like a 95% popularity issue that was only being blocked by obstructionists. So it's inherently more shades of gray moment in statehood. There's DC also had been for, I don't know, 20, 30 years, a place with like big budget surpluses and like all the statistics were going in good directions. And, this was seen as it's a much better governed place than a lot of states of the country. And again, the budget's tougher, not just in DC, but everywhere. And the things like crime that we were talking about it seems like less of a golden age in local government, which makes the sell of statehood harder, both because we're less of a golden child, and also because it's like you all got more immediate things to worry about. That's sort of where we're at right now.
I guess I'm curious, like, where DC Vote has historically gotten most of their funding from. And like, because it does seem like there's excitement among DC residents about DC statehood still, right? Especially in this last year, there's been a lot of controversy over it. And could they not sort of do a grassroots funding call from that sort of populace? Would that not work? Is that not how they're funded?
By reputation, it was a more like the board has a number of business people, lobbyists, in addition to activists. I mean, look, there's a bunch of money in Washington, and we're in a moment that's quite different where a lot of the people most energetic about local government and home rule are actually people with a certain amount of disposable income. It had used to be seen as like a cause for people who are left out. And now, there's a lot of rich people who've moved here and are like, wait a minute, I can't vote. This is outrageous. So, of course, there's people who would write a check. But, I think one of the things you do when you are soliciting people to write checks is like, well, what good will it accomplish in the immediate term? And it's just more of a bummer to say what we're going to do is stop some terrible crap that's coming down the pike, rather than to say, hey, we're going to achieve an awesome thing that has heretofore not been achieved. I'm not a marketing person, but I imagine the sales pitch is tougher.
Yeah. I also wonder if like it's kind of a signal that the sort of movement for DC statehood is changing away from something that's more formal and organized into something that's sort of social media based and ad hoc and based on events. People don't have as much interest in doing it full time, if you can just tweet about it.
the movement for DC statehood in every single other aspect of
Fair
American
enough,
life,
yeah.
I think. All right, so Kayla, you went this week, on a happier note, to a big museum reopening.
Yeah, so the National Museum of Women in the Arts is going to reopen this Saturday. They're opening to the public. It's going to be free this weekend. However, all the tickets for that is sold out. However, they are taking some walk-ins starting at noon, but it's really an incredible renovation. They reopened after over 2 years and a $70 million renovation job. And the improvement is drastic. Like, I remember going before the renovation and it was great. I'm not going to lie. I feel like I mostly went because I wanted to support the museum and I liked the idea of the museum, but it was never my favorite museum in DC by any means. But after this trip, I've got to say, I was thoroughly impressed. I will definitely go back. I think it's $13 for DC residents. I feel like that's a steal. You can go. It'll probably take 2 or 3 hours to walk through the museum. It feels like everything is new. I think over 40% of the pieces on display are being displayed for the first time. And a lot of it is really big scale, like these huge sculptures, really big pieces that are like dangling from the ceiling or flowing over walls. And it's very fun to like
Wow.
interact with and walk around. It's like so hard not to touch it, but obviously don't do that, but it feels like you should. But yeah, I highly recommend you guys check it out.
So I think, a lot of us in DC we're so spoiled by the Smithsonian that you said it's a steal for $13, but like that feels like a ripoff because free is a steal.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I'm curious, this museum was established obviously to highlight work of women artists who were often underappreciated in like big establishment organizations. Is there like any orientation to the collection besides the gender of the artists? Is it all Americans? Is it more modern, or does it have like a time period?
It's international. So there's like almost like 100 artists that are represented at the museum. It's become more political, I would say. I think previously they took a very non-political stance. They said they were a platform for women artists, right? But they never took any sort of activist stance, right? And it seems like now they're really leaning into that side of things. They say they want to be, both a platform and a megaphone. A lot of the pieces, if not most of the pieces, are political statements of some kind.
So how do they marry like their old artwork, which was a little bit more classical pieces, traditional portraits and things, with this new like racial justice protest sculptures and just more politically minded pieces that they have? Like, are they sequestered in different rooms, like, or are they side by side? And if so, how do they make that work?
Yeah, so one of the exhibits that's really interesting is their main collection, which they're calling Remix the Collection, which takes up an entire floor, is exactly that. It's sort of these old school style sort of portraits that you might imagine that are like done by like, famous women painters in the 15th century, right side by side with like these amazing sculptures that are like, maybe they're like dyed the same color, but they're political protest sculptures, right? Like sometimes it's designed where it's grouped by color. Like there's a couple of color themed rooms, which I found really interesting. They're separated by like material that they use, or maybe like a broader theme, like whether it's like homemaking or like ceramics. The themes are very interesting. They're sort of grouped in a way that you wouldn't expect, which I think actually makes it a lot more interesting to go through because they're juxtaposed and you can kind of see how those pieces converse with each other in a way that you really don't see in many museums. The other exhibit I would really recommend is their inaugural exhibit, which is called The Sky's the Limit. And that's where I was talking about a lot of those giant sculptures are located. And you can really just spend some time walking around and walking through those. I think that alone is kind of worth it if you're just going to see one thing.
This sounds like a real transformation. I'm excited to go check it out. I know that it's obviously a lot more money than most of the museums in DC.
But if you're a resident, it's $3 less.
Yeah.
Wait, I hate to be the Philistine
No,
here,
don't do it.
but is there like a cool cafe or place to eat inside?
I don't know. I didn't go. They do have a lot of new fun things. They have like a new theater. They have new bathrooms. I was very excited about that. Very pretty. Everything's like ADA accessible now. I'm sure there is a cafe. I don't think it was open when I went, but you should definitely go and report back on that because I am all about the museum food. It seems like they would have something very classy.
But also, it's right across the street from McDonald's, so you could also go there.
It is. That's true. Yeah, a classic combo.
Red hot. All right, Priyanka, Kayla, awesome to hang out with you guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And that is all for today here on CityCast DC. Our lead producer is Priyanka Tilve. Our producer is Julia Karen. Our newsletter writer is Kayla Cote-Stemmerman. Our production assistant is Susanna Brown. And our hosts are Bridget Todd and me, Michael Schaefer from Politico. Music is by Alex Roldan. If you enjoyed the show, why don't you schedule an affray and fight someone who doesn't like it? We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Bye.